Hey guys, what I want to do today is give another example of how a major company that was on the verge of bankruptcy was able to use the targeting strategy, the same exact strategy that you were presented, to turn the company around and become the world's largest company. All right. The company I'm talking about is Apple. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the startup or the history of the corporation of Apple, it started in the mid 1970s. Steve Jobs, as well as two others, started the company primarily with a design called the Apple II, which was a personal computer. A lot of education schools actually adopted this, and a lot of households adopted that version. In the 1980s, Steve Jobs was actually fired from the company that he created. Well, how could this happen? Once the company evolved and you had a board of directors, they had a new model called the Macintosh, which Steve Jobs put a lot of time and energy into. It was over budget, over time, and it actually became a financial disaster. So, because of it, Steve Jobs was actually fired from the company. Let's fast forward to the late 90s. In that time frame, Steve Jobs tried to create a couple of other computer companies that were not successful. However, one thing that he did do with success was he actually got involved with Pixar and was part of the group that kicked off the Pixar series, right? So you remember Toy Story in the works. Steve Jobs also at one point was one of the largest independent shareholders of Disney through his work with Pixar. So now let's fast forward to the late 90s. Apple was in a completely different situation. It almost went bankrupt. And they practically begged Steve Jobs to come back and try to resurrect and turn the company around. And he did. And we know where Apple is today. So, how did Steve Jobs do it? What happened? What strategies did he use? How did he go back to basics? And what did he do to turn the company around? All right. You notice how I always say, remember, your resources are limited. So you have to maximize the resources that you have. If you spread yourself too thin, if you try to be everything to everyone, you end up being nothing to no one. You hear me say this all the time. And that's pretty much what happened with Apple. They had numerous, vast majority of different product lines trying to satisfy various different segments. Here's where this can be an issue. You might think to yourself, oh, it's great to have all these different models and blah, 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 blah. When you have thousands of different SKU numbers, thousands of different models, number one, you need to have thousands of different manufacturing templates to create these products. You need to have storage units to store thousands of different units. You need Salesforce to sell thousands of different units to thousands of different segments. You're starting to get the point. I know when I say thousands, it sounds elaborate, but this is literally where Apple was at the time. So when Steve Jobs came back in the late 90s, one of the things that he said is, okay, we need to simplify. We have too many models. We're trying to be too many things to too many different groups, and this is just not working. We need to solidify. We need to go back to basics. And what he did is he went back to his targeting strategy. So I'm going to pull up the template that you guys all have access to. If you have not done so already, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. If you do not have this template, make sure you reach out because it's definitely beneficial. So this right here is our targeting template, all right? Normally we start with the segment. Why are people doing business with us? Who are they? How are they connected with each other? Now I'm going to actually start on this slide, niche or majority. Now some of you might be saying, oh, wait a minute, what are you doing? You're going out of order. You're messing me up. These strategies are dynamic. And even though I can give you a good rule of thumb of where to start and a rule of thumb of a sequence, it's important for you to understand that these different templates build off each other. So if you are a brand new company and you're starting from scratch, yes, it's a good idea for you to start from the top, defining your segments. But remember, Apple has already been in business for 20 years. So they kind of have an idea of who their segments are. They just need to reprioritize. This is a good starting point for this. And here's why. What Steve Jobs needs to do now is he needs to identify what segments are key, what segments are most profitable, and what segments does he need to get rid of. And how is this done? Okay, let's start with the first one. Who will do business because it's you? Who are your brand loyalists? Well, at this time in the late 90s, Apple actually had fantastic contracts in the education system. So I know when I went to elementary school, I won't tell you how long ago that was, we actually had an Apple computer. When I went to college, we actually had Apple computers. Apple's sales force was absolutely fantastic penetrating the education system. So if that was one of their greatest niches, if that was one of their greatest segments, what section should they want to continue to have? Education. Why? Because you already have the connections. If you start off with a completely new, different segment, that means you need to hire a new sales force. You need new distribution channels. You need different product offerings, right? It's very simplistic to start with what you already have. That's your bread and butter. So that right there is the education system. So I'm going to put right here, I'm going to put schools and colleges. These are people who will do business just because it is him. All right? For now, I'm going to skip this element of new because Apple really did not have a huge loyal following at that time outside of the schools and colleges. All right? And I'm going to get to this in the next point. What I want to focus now is competitive advantage. Apple knew that they could solidify the colleges and the schools. But now they had to see where could we branch off from this. Remember, one of the key things we need to identify is connectivity. How are your segments connected? So what Apple's trying to do is when these students graduate, what sectors, what industries would key students be in that would take an Apple laptop or an Apple computer with them as they advance into their professional career, all right? So what are some different options? Accounting. Well, accounting uses Microsoft-based systems. You have Microsoft Excel. You have Microsoft Project. So when you're looking at accounting, maybe even engineering and supply chain, those are pretty much industries that are entrenched with Microsoft systems. So it might not be the easiest path to resistance, right? So one of the things we want to think of is remember our buyer persona. What are people's goals? What are passions? What are problems? These are what we call active elements, right? So what I want to do is I want to find out what industry is facing the most amount of pain, what industry is in line with our compatibilities, what industry might have the greatest amount of passions. And through their research, this is what we found. I don't know if any of you were into digital media or video media in the late 90s, early 2000s, but here's how a process would normally go. You would film a video on a camera that had a mini DV cassette. Then you'd have to take the cassette off, put the cassette in a digital converter that would take that videotape and actually transport it into a digital file so that you could then edit. Now, here's what would normally happen. As you know, on a digital file, as a digital video, you have an audio file and you have a video file, a visual file. Those are two separate tracks, the audio as well as what you see. Well, often in this digital conversion process, you would have what we call dropped frames. So as I'm exporting a tape into a digital file, I could have audio frames that drop. I could have video frames that drop. And what I mean by drop is it just doesn't carry over. So if you are frame 22, it goes from 21 to 23. 22 is completely gone. Now, why is this so troublesome? If you lose an audio frame, remember the video and the audio is supposed to be synced. So if one drops and the other one doesn't, what happens? The result of that is that it looks like someone is lip syncing, where the words is not matching what you actually see. So now what you got to do is you got to go back. You got to find out where exactly in the track that drop happened. Remember, it doesn't tell you. You got to find out yourself. You got to cut out certain frames, realign it. It is a pain in the butt. Very time consuming. The other issue is what we call rendering time. So once you've actually edited your video, now that final process has to print into a new movie file. Very time consuming. So let me give you an example. A 30-second commercial could actually take you 2 hours to render. Now imagine if you had a 30-minute video, how long that would take you. So there was a lot of pain points in the creative design. So that happened with video, that happened with graphic designers using large files. Now this is when websites started to becoming big. So web designers were having the same issues. So if you were Apple, what area has the biggest amount of pain? And here's the other thing. What was fantastic about Apple systems compared to Microsoft systems is at the time, Apple systems did not drop frames. It was very rare for an Apple system to drop a frame. And the rendering time was significantly more advanced. You had iMovie, which was on Apple systems, which is for more beginner editors and video individuals. Then you also had Final Cut Pro, which was a fantastic editing tool that you could use. So here's what Apple did, and here's how they used their targeting strategy. Number one, they realized, hey, listen, who is going to do business because it's me or it's new? And I can put this in both of these right here. And that's the colleges and the schools. They have contracts with us. They are always seeking our newest devices. They are loyal to us. We already have the establishment set up. And many of them have multi-year, even 10-year contracts, right? But now look at this competitive advantage. Which one of these has the biggest pain point? Which target can I offer? Which segment can I offer the biggest competitive advantage? And the answer to that was creative design. So this creative design, this would be video. This right here would be graphic designers. And now we have this new category of web emerging. So here's the concept. The concept right here is I have connections with colleges and with schools. And I know individuals at these colleges are going to graduate and they're going to enter into the workforce. And what I want them to do is I want them to take the experience of that Apple computer that they have and bring it forward back into the workplace that they have, all right? So you're seeing how this right here is playing out. Now what I want to do is now we can start to develop our segments, okay? So notice what I did here. First, I started to find out, okay, who are we currently have contract? Again, this is not a new business. This is a currently established business. 20 years. They need to have a redeveloped system, all right? So they already have a clientele. A new business cannot do this strategy because they don't have a clientele yet. So what they're saying is, who's going to do business because we're new or you? And that's colleges and schools. We have a strong contract base with colleges and schools. Most of them getting their computers through us. But now I need to find out competitive advantage. Who has the biggest pain point, biggest goal, biggest passion that we can fulfill? Well, we got this creative element. So now notice what happens here. So why will people use us? Okay, so first group, who? We got colleges and schools. Why are people using them? Well, because it's the system that the school has in place. So now, if I go to a college and the college has an Apple computer, why am I using that computer? Because it's what the school provides, right? And why is the school providing it? Because we already have a contract in it. Okay, but now what do I want to do? Okay, how am I going to get this right here? So how are they connected? They're connected with their classes, connected in their dorms. Okay, well, now what I want to do is I want recent grads. Okay, so they start off with the colleges. They're recent grads, and they're in the creative design industries. So you got graphic designers, you got video, you got web. And why are they going to use my platform? Well, think of this. If they're using an Apple computer in school, no dropped frames for video, low render times, okay, greater functionality. And now all of a sudden they go to their workplace, and the workplace has a computer that's dropping frames left and right, that has very long rendering times. What system are they going to want? Do they want the system that drops frames left and right? Or the system that has a significant amount of rendering time? Or do they want what they had in college, where you have no drop frames and you get the work done half the amount of time? Obviously that one. So now all of a sudden they're using these Apple systems at work, and now their work is getting done a lot faster, a lot more efficient, they're a lot more productive, and they're actually heads and leaps around the people that have been there for a while. So now what happens? Well, now their bosses look at it, right? Now their bosses look at it, and they start saying, hey, man, how were you able to get this done so quick and so fast while everyone else is not doing it? What do the bosses want? They want more productivity. Okay, so now you have individuals who know about Apple because of the classes in their dorms. Now, right here, you have new coworkers, and now how do they connect? Well, they connect through the coworkers. They also connect through their bosses, right? So now their bosses want to implement this system, the Apple computers, through all of their different functions, right? In all of the different areas. They want Apple now to be the official computer of their creative design department. Why? Because it's more productivity, it's easier, it's quicker, right? Well, now what happens? Now all of a sudden you get into this phase where people start doing work from home, right? So if you have this Apple computer at work that's so much more effective and you need to get some work done at home, well, what kind of system do you want at home, right? So now the why is getting work at home. Who is it? Well, now we got our workers, right? In all department, the entire department. How are they connected, right? Obviously this is still all work related. So start to see this pattern. At the time, Apple was not popular buying an individual going to a computer store to buy an Apple. That was not a popular element, right? That was not a big part of their business. Their business was more institutional based, primarily with colleges and schools. That was their base. So how do we build upon that? Well, what can that connect us to? Well, our biggest competitive advantage is our system doesn't drop frames. Our system is more productive. Our system is more powerful. Our system is more productive, especially for the design elements that need large amounts of RAM. So if I focus my system on the creative arts, when they graduate and they go into the workforce, they don't want a system that drops frames and takes a long rendering time. They want a system like they had in college that is quick, easy, functional to use. So they buy those systems to use at work. Now their bosses see how much more productive they are. Now what system does the boss want for the entire department? You're getting the point. Now people start doing work from home. Well, now what system do they want at their house? They want the Apple. And now you can start to see how one after the other it starts to develop. Now what Apple did was, you had your era of Napster and music sharing, and now creative individuals are starting to do this work at home. Well, creative music fits in perfectly. A lot of music artists were using Apple. So now they actually come up with their Apple Music in the iPod. And why do people want to get Apple? So now you actually had music on the go with your iPod. And guess what? It connects to your Apple device, your Apple computer. So who wants this right here? Well, music enthusiasts. How are they all connected? They're all friends. And now you're starting to see how this developed. But what I want you to see, more importantly, and not only friends, but also it could be school. There was a lot of people who actually had an iPod, went to their schools because the schools had the Apple systems, and updated their iPad from their school systems because they're the ones that had it, right? But I want you to notice how one segment connects to the next. You start off with schools, then you go to recent grads, then you go into the professional development and how much more productive they were. Now the bosses adopt it. Now people going home want the system at their home. Now all of a sudden, Apple Music started to come out, and you had the Apple Store with the iPods. And now you started to see the turn of the company. Okay? So now let's see how the rest of it fits. Is Apple premium, mainstream, economic? They're definitely not economic. They're definitely not the cheapest. I'd say they're probably right up in here, right? They're definitely not the most expensive computer, but they're definitely not the cheapest. They're probably in this midway point, right? That's their market tier. You normally expect a higher quality product when you buy Apple. You also know it's not going to be the cheapest. As far as niches go, right? So first, new and you, we had the colleges, and we had the colleges, and then you had the creative designs. And then where did we go to? So first we started right here. So you had colleges, you had creative designs. Then you went into home office because people wanted to use it at home. Then you went into music for the iPod. Okay? And then eventually it started to hit the masses. Especially started to hit the masses with the evolution of the iPhone. So the iPhone and the iPod really is what helped Apple go from a niche into a mainstream. But now here's the important thing to remember. What happens when Steve Jobs went back to the company if he actually focused on this first and he said, okay, listen, we want to be a mainstream company? It wouldn't have worked because, number one, their resources were already so spread thin with all the different designs, and they didn't have a foothold into this majority. Microsoft-based systems already had penetrated this right here. It would have been very difficult. Notice how they started small. They focused on one segment at a time. They focused on where their resources were. They focused on where they could maximize. And then you look right here, little by little, segment by segment, now they started to expand. All right, guys, so that's how Apple was on the verge of bankruptcy and was able to turn their complete system around by using the same exact strategy that you guys now have access to. Question is, what can you do about it with your business? All right, guys, have a good one.